So welcome to the second panel of the day. We have one of our speakers on his way. He will be here any minute, but we can start maybe with the introduction. I'm very pleased to have Steve Zager here as our moderator. Steve is a New York City-based consultant and educator focusing on restaurants and food retail businesses. He has developed an extensive knowledge of the culinary industry, specializing in the business side of food enterprises. He's been a consultant to a wide variety of clients, from owners and operators of independent restaurants, food stores, and other kinds of food businesses. His involvement includes operational review, litigation support, business evaluation, market analysis, lease evaluations, and many other technical and business aspects. He is currently the Dean of Business and Industry Programs and an instructor at the Institute of Culinary Education in New York. He is also a clinical associate professor in the food studies and nutrition department at New York University. And of course, he's very often a speaker in public events, and he writes about these topics. Steve, please.
Thank you, Fabio. Okay. Well, welcome everybody to our panel. And I just have to tell you, this is a gorgeous auditorium. I mean, it's just, I feel like the Rockettes should be dancing behind me in a moment. It's spectacular here. But what Fabio didn't say was that, and I really probably not supposed to say this, but he invited Donald Trump to this, knowing where he stands on the environmental issues. But Donald unfortunately couldn't come, but he did send a message on which I got, which he said, in honor of this, he is going to, when he builds the wall, it's going to be all out of repurposed macaroni and cheese boxes, which is his favorite lunch. Even though he wasn't here, he did send us a recipe for his famous Mexican flan. We also invited Hillary, but she sent a recipe, or she tried to, but it was lost on her server. Well, I guess I'm pretty much done now. So welcome to our panel on repurposing, or as we say, the food world's answer to HGTV's Flip or Flop. When someone called me and asked me about doing something on this panel, first they had a very heavy-duty New York accent, so it sounded like repurposing. And I thought we were doing something on SeaWorld and sea life. But when I found out what we were doing, I was kind of wondering, why me? Because as you heard my credentials, I'm certainly involved in the business side of the world. And my family we're not known as great recyclers or repurposers. We probably have a section of a landfill named after us. But when I found out I was going to come, I became very aware and very, very conscious of what I needed to do. And one day at my house, one of these LED bulbs burnt out, which is supposed to last for 20 years. And I didn't throw it out. I painted it and made it a paperweight. And I had some ribs one night, and delicious baby back ribs, and I didn't throw them out. I dried them out and painted them and made them a paperweight. And I had an old winter boot that wasn't any good, so I painted that and made that a paperweight. And I thought to myself, how have I lived so long without all of these great paperweights? I've never ever needed a paperweight before, and I don't know what I do with them. In fact, I've gone now to collecting the hairs in my sink. And I'm going to be, in 20 years, I'm going to put them in a pillow. You can see by my hair, it's going to take a long time. Well, the folks here are incredibly impressive. I mean, we have a Harvard-trained MD. We have famous designers. We have top professors. We have people specializing in interior elements. We have a Michelin-starred and New York Times-starred chef, and those are the people just at the front desk. No, I'm just kidding. But we have an august group here of very, very, very fine panelists. And I feel like I have been asked to go from leading a jug band to conducting the Philharmonic. any one of these panelists could mesmerize us for an hour and a half with their presentations and the stories that they tell. But before we do, I just want to go over a couple of terms they might use. As a good moderator, I think it's important for me to kind of lay down the foundation. So these are some design speak terms that some of you may not know the definitions of. First one is the word vintage. Really means old and moldy. Okay. Secondly, redesign. That means they might have messed up the first time, but they're charging you now. The next one is building envelope, which means you better pay the bill or you're building it yourself. Plan elevation. That means they plan to get drunk or high after working with you. And the last one, steel erection, which of course means you better go to your doctor after 4 hours. So let's talk about our panelists. They have incredible credentials. They're going to mesmerize you, and it's time to begin. So the first person on my right is Missy. And let me tell you a moment about her background. Missy is a celebrated chef, and I know that for many reasons because she's an alum of ICE, and in fact on our very, very, very prestigious list of fame and Hall of Fame. She began while attending Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. As a part-time job at 1789 Restaurant, a terrific restaurant was in Washington. Then, of course, she went to ICE. She worked with Chef Ann Rosenzweig and in several different locations. And she went to Italy and studied in Italy and with the family-run rustic trattorias in Tuscany to the Michelin-rated Agli Amici in Friuli, growing intimate with Italian products and cooking. Missy fell in love with the simplicity and regional inspiration and innate focus on quality ingredients that characterize Italian food. Upon returning to the United States, she worked as a sous chef and later a chef de cuisine at the boutique Soho Grand Hotel. Eager to celebrate her appreciation for the simplicity of Italian cuisine, she was lured to Chicago in 2003 by Tony Mantuano, one of the nation's few 4-star Italian chefs, at the highly acclaimed Spiaggia. As executive chef of Spiaggia and Cafe Spiaggia, she brought her passion for Italian cooking to life, responsible for menu development and the evolution of the restaurant. Then she became executive chef of Voce restaurants in the fall of 2008 to 2013. You may remember in New York City here. She received critical acclaim for creating classic Italian specialties with a contemporary twist. Under her direction, Voce Madison earned a Michelin star in 2001, while Voce Columbus earned its Michelin star in 2010. Very difficult honors to achieve. Chef Robbins has been recognized for her talents, earning many of the food world's top accolades. In 2005, Star Chefs named her one of Chicago's 10 rising star chefs of the year, as did Restaurant Hospitality. The same year, she received writer William Rice's Most Promising Chef Award. And of course, as I mentioned, she was awarded the ICE Hall of Fame. During her tenure at Spiaggia, the restaurant was nominated by the James Beard Foundation for Outstanding Restaurant nationally twice, and for Outstanding Service in 2008. In 2010, she was named one of Food & Wine's best new chef, and she was the only woman included on the list and the only chef from New York. Most recently, and I hope you're listening to this, she opened her first restaurant, Lilia, in January 2016 in North Williamsburg, so we should all be running right over there afterwards. The restaurant has received critical acclaim and public acclaim, earning 3 stars in the New York Times and praise from numerous outlets around the country. Welcome, Missy.
Thank you. Wow, that's quite a really long bio. My apologies. So when they asked me to be on this panel, it was kind of surprising to me. I'm a chef. I'm used to going on panels and doing demos and talking about food and my inspiration behind food, but I do have an immense love of design, and I think in my next life, if I had the talent for it, I would love to design all my own restaurants and design furniture. So it's sort of exciting to be on a panel with these guys, and and kind of learn about what they do. And I was very intimately involved with the design process of Lilia, and it was the first time that I got to design a restaurant from start to finish, and really was blessed with this incredible space. I don't know how many of you have been to Lilia, but the reason I was asked here is that it was formerly an auto body shop. We're located in Williamsburg on North 10th and Union Avenue, and we occupy an entire corner. It's about a 2,500 square foot building, single story, huge roof deck potential, which we haven't quite gotten to yet. And we built this restaurant really trying to preserve the space. And I looked at over 30 restaurants before I chose this one, and it was sort of a no-brainer. Williamsburg was not a no-brainer for me. I'm a Manhattanite, not anymore. I moved to Brooklyn after I opened the restaurant, but I was looking in Manhattan for months, and I looked at many, many spaces, and some of them were existing restaurants, and some of them were warehouses, and there's always issues with whatever space you take. I kind of came into the process after my partners had done a lot of the legwork of making sure, after all these cars were in there, and chemicals, that it was environmentally safe, and we passed all those tests. But the first day that I saw it, there was indeed a car in there where my bar now sits. And you have to have an immense amount of vision. My now business partner, Sean, said, "Can you please go look at the space in Williamsburg?" And I kind of walked in, and I had no intention of opening a restaurant in Brooklyn. And I walked in, and I was like, okay, there's a car. There's really ugly paneling on the ceilings. The windows look like someone's in jail. There were gates. The painting of a giant yellow sign was sort of an eyesore. It didn't look like it does now, but I do think that I have a pretty good vision of space and light and kind of what it could be. And I left, and I sort of said, well, I don't know if I want to really open in Williamsburg, but let's kind of try and understand the space and where it is in the neighborhood. And that had a lot to do with it too, because the neighborhood was sort of crying out for something to be there that would enhance the neighborhood, both in maybe design and providing a service, which we now do. So what we did was, I have a very simple aesthetic in general. I wanted the restaurant to look like I would want my home to look. I really like light woods and grays and kind of neutral colors. But people come into the restaurant all the time and say, oh my God, this is so beautiful. And I like to take partial credit, and I had amazing designers. We had an architect named Craig Sholito and an interior designer named Matt Maddy, and both of them worked in conjunction to really kind of oversee my vision and what I saw in terms of kind of integrating the kitchen with the space. The kitchen's an open kitchen, and really it was meant to be so that there was interaction with the guest. But I think in terms of this panel, what is most important is that we preserved as much as the building as we possibly could and just enhanced it. So the windows, we were really lucky. Originally, we intended on totally redoing them, and we learned that the steel was in perfect condition. We have beautiful steel windows, and we just had to replace the glass, and we painted them white. We painted the whole building white. The skylights were existing, and we actually did very little to them. The brick was existing, and we kind of just enhanced it and treated it. I don't know what we did with it, but we did something to make it look really good. Sorry, maybe you know, I don't know. But it looks beautiful, it's white. And then I think most importantly, the ceiling, which had panels all over it, and underneath those really ugly panels were gorgeous wood beams, and they still exist now. They're the originals. We sanded them a little bit, but we didn't really have to do much. But what we did was use them to create the lighting scheme in the restaurant, and those beams kind of create this beautiful, beautiful environment. We like to call it Lilia lighting, and everyone looks really pretty at Lilia. Everyone. I'm told nightly how good I look, and I know I don't look that good. So I thank God every day for my lighting designers. But the other thing about the beams is we have 16-foot ceilings, and I was terrified that it would be a very noisy space. I've worked in really noisy spaces. I've worked in spaces we've had to put thousands and thousands of dollars into making noise barriers. We have never gotten one noise complaint in the entire time we're there, and I'm told it's because of the wood absorbs a lot of the noise, which is very cool. I think the other thing we did was use the height of the building. We have 16-foot ceilings, and we wanted to maximize as much space. I have an inordinately large kitchen for a New York restaurant. I'm very blessed, and I'm really lucky, and people always comment on the size of my kitchen, but we also decided, instead of cramming seats in, like many New York restaurants do, we left it to 60 seats, so there's a lot of space for our guests, and there's, I like to call it the runway, where all these really elated people can walk down and look amazing. But we used a lot of the height to create storage and to create lofted areas. So our office is built in a loft above my prep kitchen, and our storage for wine and other supplies is built in a loft behind our bar. And then all of our storage in the kitchen for dry goods is built on shelving above us. So we got creative with that, and it was a really cool process for me of sort of learning how to, you know, I came from very corporate environments where we spent millions and millions of dollars building these restaurants, and Lilia was not that project. And for me, it was a great lesson in how do you make a beautiful restaurant, preserving really beautiful elements and still enhancing them without spending $5 million to open a restaurant, and really kind of walking into this beautiful space. And now when I look for spaces in the future, I sort of think about the same things, and I'll never find a space like Lily again. It's not going to happen. I got really lucky on this one. But when I think about how to build the next restaurant, whether it's in a brand new space or a brand new building or whatever it is, I think about sort of how we were able to do things without overdoing them, and that's sort of my mantra. So it's been a really fun project, and I look forward to getting to design many, many restaurants. So.
It's terrific, and thank you, Missy. And again, one of the themes that I'm going to bring up later on is the fact mixing practicality with design and making sure that things not only design beautifully but work beautifully. And she was really describing that in a very nicely way. Thank you.
Welcome.
So now I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Jonsara Ruth. And I'm sure she feels right at home here at the New School Auditorium. Yep. She's a designer, artist, design director of Healthy Materials Lab, and an assistant professor of interior design at the Parsons School of Design. She is a founding director of the progressive MFA Interior Design program at Parsons, and she led Aftertaste, the symposium that brings new definition to the field of interiors. Central to all of her work is a dedication to understanding human experience and human health as a central motivation for design. At Healthy Materials Lab, we raise awareness about toxics in building products and create resources for designers and architects to make healthier places for all people to live. Jonsara founded Salty Labs, a collaborative design studio to lead projects with the mission of elevating human experience and improving environmental health in public places, interiors, installations, future design, and manufacturing. Jonsara received a Master's of Architecture from Cranbrook Academy of Art and a BFA in Industrial Design from the Rhode Island School of Design. Welcome, Jonsara.
Thank you. So I'm going to show you some pictures. So thank you for the introduction to participate in this event. I'm totally intrigued by the analogy, actually there's a really strong analogy between what I do in design and what you guys are doing in food in terms of the production of food and the consumption of food, the production of design, the consumption of design. And I've just found yesterday and today totally fascinating, as well as Missy's story right now, and I have a million questions for you. So I guess what I thought I would do today, just with a short amount of time, is to just take you through one project that I was involved in deeply with Salty Labs. We were asked to design a restaurant I think in about 2011. It got started, it opened in 2013. And so I thought I would just take you through this. This is it's called Vinateria. It's a restaurant in South Harlem. It's located on the corner of 119th Street and Frederick Douglass Boulevard. I worked with the client before she found a space, so similar, we looked at lots of spaces in this area where she grew up, and eventually found this space on a corner, on that corner, so it wraps around. And the first thing we did was to think about the facade and how to bring an inviting element. So, you know, she had grown up in South Harlem, and her parents both were raised in South Harlem, and they have a very strong community there. And she and her husband really wanted to make a community seat, like a community table, the county seat on this corner, and really bring the longtime residents of Harlem together with the newer gentrifying residents and make a place for everybody to gather. And so that was the original goal of this restaurant. So in terms of design, how we do that, I guess, you know, that's what we were wrestling with, and how do we make it feel both familiar, like, yes, we need to go sit at that bar, and new, like, that's a kind of intriguing new way to look at a restaurant. So I'll just take you through quickly the restaurant. You walk in, and there's the bar to your right. You look ahead, there's a chalkboard. You look around. It's a pretty small restaurant. It's about 800 square feet, maybe 900 square feet. Look back at the windows, towards the felt wall, towards the back. The chef at that time, he was a founding chef of this restaurant, wanted a window so he could communicate and look at his customers. So we built this around him. We go back, it was, I don't know, this was 2012, but this was a transgender bathroom. Everyone washes their hands together, and then walking back out through the restaurant, which seems to be pretty crowded even now, every night of the week. So that's a walkthrough of the restaurant itself on the corner of Frederick Douglass and 119th Street. But, you know, the Salty Labs was, I founded Salty Labs really to ask questions about design, ask questions about our discipline, as we were doing in the MFA Interior Design program, as we were doing in Aftertaste, really to ask the question of how do we make meaningful design? What are we doing here, really? And I came across, you know, I think that there's a real designer's dilemma, which is appearing to me very deeply, but also to the students in our graduate program, and really was kind of the agent of why I moved from full-time design practice to academia and this studio that is able to ask questions. And that designer's dilemma is really about design and consumption and our planet. You know, firstly, like, we have so much stuff on the planet. Why do we ever need to make anything new? And as a designer, you're constantly designing new things. So that is a real contradiction. And secondly, when I was growing up, in my household, there was an ethos: you are what you eat. And there was a real conscientious, we composted, we grew our own food, we were vegetarian. There was a lot of ethos in the way that we ate, in the way that we consumed. And you know, that was a mantra that was kind of reverberating in my head, but it turns out more recently that we know that we also are where we live. That in addition to what we eat and what we ingest in terms of food, we also ingest particles, like infinitesimally small, like invisible particles in what we eat. We breathe in particles, we absorb through our skin these kind of invisible things that come from our environments. And so these are big questions, and that, you know, our biology, our human bodies are really made up of the particles that we breathe, that we eat, that we absorb. So I really wanted to test a design in that way. Like, it's one thing to talk about it in the classroom or to teach this or to talk about it at the Health Materials Lab, but how do we build a restaurant with these questions? And so that's what Vinateria was about for me. It was an experiment. How do we work with these questions? And so the questions are, can we build this restaurant with as few materials, as few new things as possible? Trying not to create many new things. Can we build the restaurant with materials that do not emit extra things into the air, so that the aromas that you smell are food and beverage, food and wine, and not other kind of synthetic things? And there was a pretty tight budget. And so luckily, my client was very interested in these questions also, and very open with what I was calling an experiment, which maybe I didn't say to her at that time. But she was open to these same questions. So that was, the beginning was really, really good. So I thought what I would just do, I guess those questions go deeper in a way for me, which is every time we were to select a material, we would say, where does that material come from? And where will it go at the end of its life? So before we even bring it in. And what is that material made of? What are its ingredients? And how much does it cost? And of course, does this place, in the culmination of all these things, attract the longtime residents and the new residents? Is it going to be that corner place that invites everybody in, just by by the atmosphere that it exudes? So then I just thought maybe I'll just take you through. So we're looking at the bar. When you walk in, this bar came from, this is on the upper left there. That's the bar in its Connecticut warehouse where it lived for several years after it was salvaged out of Gramercy Park. It was from an old 1930s bar, and Evan from Demolition Depot has been collecting interiors all over the country. He has one of the largest collection of salvaged interiors, I think, in the nation. And so we went up to Connecticut and looked at maybe 10 different bars to see what would fit in our space, but also what would kind of fit with the ethos that we were trying to create. And then we reimagined how we would put together these panels so that it would fit in that space. And then bringing it in, how do we make it not just be kind of a nostalgic bar, but blend in with the back wall to bring about this kind of darkness there. We painted it, we stripped it down, sanded it down, and painted it with milk paint. Milk paint is, maybe some of you know, is a very old kind of surface treatment. It's really made from milk protein. It's casein protein, which binds with wood fibers, and it gets harder over time. And you can get this kind of very beautiful chalky substance, but it actually, you can wipe it clean. And so these are the ingredients of milk paint, which are kind of inert. And then we look at the back bar, and there's this collection of vintage glass and old chalkboards. That chalkboard is slate. It came from, actually it came from another salvager at Totally Bruce, which had many chalkboards, and we picked the right ones and had them cut down to size just for that wall. Slate, again, is just a metamorphic rock, and it comes locally. It's you can find it in New England. And this vintage glass collection, which is on the back wall, was collected by the great Fritz Karsch. He's an amazing collector of things. And he put together a collection of vintage carafes, wine carafes, and beer pitchers. The rule he had was everything had to be under $25 each. And so he pulled together this collection and then put it on display. And it's pretty much the way, I guess some of these things get used and some of them continue to be on display. And glass, well, maybe that's later, I guess. So then we looked into the restaurant itself. And again, it's pretty simple, and it looks like it's a collection of objects. The walls are painted with lime paint. And again, the ingredients of lime paint is a surface treatment that is used historically for centuries and centuries, a lot in Southern Europe, a lot in, you see that in Greece and in Southern Italy. And really, it's limestone that's ground up. And washed on walls, and it has this, again, a very matte treatment that takes the light reflection really well. It looks really beautiful. And it's been remade in recent times for now to compete with our more synthetic paints that we have, which are, touted for being very durable and washable. So in order for companies to compete, they've added a little bit of an elasticizer, which you see down here, which is not the greatest ingredient in terms of health, but it's very small, and it does allow this particular paint to compete with all the other kinds of paints that are out there. It also absorbs and releases humidity and odor. The collection of chairs, again, was, we collected these chairs over time, found each one to have its own character. It had to kind of pass the test of character before it came into our collection. And then in order to unify them, we gave them all a datum line, kind of pulled up the socks on the chairs, so each of them kind of belonged. And then that datum line continues along the bottom of all of the tables. Maybe it's a little dark there on the left to see that it lines up with the tables and it lines up with the floor so that you feel like that when you see it, it's a datum line that runs across everything, even though there's a lot of found objects in the space. That floor in particular is an unglazed porcelain tile, which again is an absorptive material, again made from clay and feldspar and a little bit of sand and quartz and a little bit of pigment, but it also absorbs and releases humidity and toxins from the air. The vintage collection of light shades were put in here, glass. They're all glass, and the glass, again, is these very basic natural materials to make glass. And again, some machine bases for tables. We made the tops, we found the bottoms, we refinished them. The wall is wool. Wool is a really great material, again, for absorbing and releasing toxins from the air, well, actually absorbing, and as well as absorbing sound. We found a factory in Pennsylvania that is making those like small felt washers that are like used under furniture as a furniture, pads, and also they're used in oil burning furnaces as wicks. But anyway, they have these machines which just punch out circles of felt all day long. It's 100% felt. And so we purchased this 250-pound bale of the scrap, this kind of industrial scrap, and we brought it back to the studio and ironed it out and made the walls out of that scrap. I think it was $35 or $40 for that bale. And that went on the wall, and it does absorb sound as well as any kind of odor. And of course, wool, it's 100% wool, and it has a very natural source. And then in the back, we found a vintage piece of furniture as a serving table, a serving kind of bar, and that holds a lot of all this cutlery and all of the napkins and that kind of thing. And then on top of the bar, the dimensions of that back stainless piece came from the dimensions of the vintage wood serving piece, and then accommodated for the chef's window. And that back wall was meant to be very reflective, so we had a collection of aluminum and pewter things that sits in that back wall, and again, Fritz Karch collected some beautiful things and arranged them back there. The stainless steel, again, is pretty inert. It's iron with a few other additives of metals. Once they're congealed, it's an inert metal. The cutlery is also found. It's all used it's probably the last century, the 20th century. But it makes a character in the space where every diner feels that they're unique in a way. Each person gets a different set. And then we gave the walls tattoos. This is an artist, Helen Quinn, who came to paint her drawings on the walls as tattoos. And these things are really small. Although when you walk in the restaurant, they're very obvious, which was such an interesting thing. It is like a body tattoo in a way. Like, it is one of the most obvious things you see when you come in the restaurant. She also painted this little rhinoceros. This is actually in silver leaf, and it lives next to the bar, and it's become kind of the mascot for the restaurant, even though it's kind of small, these little wall tattoos. That back wall, again, is lime plaster, and again, it has that matte quality that absorbs light very well as other humidity and odor from the air. Lime plaster, again, has this very basic components of natural materials. And then in the front doors, we really wanted to make the first invitation into the restaurant something inviting, something interesting, something monumental, but the doors worked fine. And we just felt like, we don't need to replace the doors. They open, they close, they're fine, but they were aluminum frame kind of bodega doors. So instead, we invited James Scott is an artist, and we asked him to make the drawings that he was making with these kind of beautiful perforated drawings, and we water jet cut them out of aluminum panels and just fit them into these bodega doors, which were not square anymore at all, so everything had to kind of fit. But then that became an element again, which is the first invitation, and they cast these shadows across the restaurant, which are kind of beautiful in daylight. The back bathrooms, one is red, one is blue, they're ceramic tiles, and again, they come from very basic materials. And so the restaurant actually has this character that is a collection of all of these things, of inert materials. Some of them do have that kind of very familiar and nostalgic feel. Hopefully, it also feels a little bit new, and that was the idea. But it really does smell of the good food that's there. It's Mediterranean kind of palette. So that's this little piece. I think that, yeah, I think that that's just a kind of a glimpse into the way that I'm thinking about design and how we might approach it.
I'm already getting hungry. Our next panelist is Dr. Robert Graham. And Dr. Robert Graham is a Harvard-trained, dual board-certified physician in both internal and integrative medicine, and is co-founder of FreshMD. Dr. Graham received his medical degree from the School of Medicine at Stony Brook University Medical Center and completed his residency in internal medicine at Lenox Hospital. He received a Master's of Public Health from the Harvard School of Public Health while completing 3 fellowships in general internal medicine, complementary and integrative medical therapies, and medical education at the Harvard Medical School. And by the way, he supplied some storylines to the TV show House we were talking about. Dr. Graham has dedicated his career to exploring the connection between food, family, farming, and health. He is a doctor who grows, cooks, and prescribes food as medicine. In 2010, he developed Fair Wellness, a culinary medicine program teaching doctors how to cook and educating them about whole food, plant-based lifestyle. In 2013, he created Victory Greens, the first edible rooftop garden at Lenox Hill Hospital. He is a frequent speaker at conferences, including TEDx Manhattan in 2015. His most recent venture is FreshMed, an innovative integrative medical practice where he is incorporating his roots in integrative and traditional medicine into our modern healthcare system, with an emphasis on having greater respect for food, relaxation, exercise, sleep, and happiness. Now that's fresh. Follow him at FreshMed NYC on Facebook, etc. And here is Dr. Graham. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. I would be remiss by not first saying thank you for introducing me to you, Fabio, and then now leading me onto this stage. So with that, thank you so much, Steve, for the generous introduction. And in the next maybe 10 minutes, I'm just going to tell you a little bit of a story of why I think we need a fresh start, or we need to look at healthcare in a fresh way. So this is a picture here of my 2 biggest projects. Here I've partnered up with a culinary school here in New York, and I'll share with you that story, as well as my wife and I, who, interestingly enough, is wearing the same shirt today, on Victory Greens at Lenox Hill Hospital. So I was always kind of perplexed by this quote here by the great Wendell Berry. People are fed by the food industry, which pays no attention to health, and are treated by the health industry, which pays no attention to food. So this kind of led me on a path, and I had an idea. So as a physician, practicing physician, why don't I just start prescribing food on prescription pads? Yes, these are prescription pads. I don't know, you youngsters, we used to write things out on a prescription pad, and then we used to give them to you. And we have found through research that you are 3 times more likely to adhere to the prescription if it's actually written and you take it home with you. So sadly, now with electronic medical records, these no longer exist. But as you can see, if it puts up there, these are real prescriptions. Eat real food, eat whole food plant-based diets, eat fruits and vegetables. And so that was like my first kind of idea. Why don't I just start prescribing food? And then I had this great privilege, and I don't know if Rick is still here, Mr. Smilo. So interestingly enough, I told Steve the story that I went to medical school at Stony Brook, and my anatomy partner, and that's how they pair you up in medical school. My last name is Graham. My best friend was Gordon. We were friends forever. So happened to be that he was Rick's, related to Rick. I think Rick's his uncle. And so in 2009, I had this idea, why don't we take doctors into the kitchen and teach them how to cook? I firmly believe that's the only way we're going to actually learn about food. You can't learn about food in a classroom. You have to actually engage with it. And so this was my first ever cooking class. It was featured in the Wall Street Journal at ICE, teaching healthy ways to cook in the kitchen. That subsequently led to an affiliation with the Natural Gourmet Institute, which is also in New York, a culinary school. It teaches a plant-based, health-focused institution. And for the last 7 years, Julie and I have actually taken doctors in the kitchen, out of the hospital and into the kitchen, to teach them the techniques of culinary arts. But then with the whole idea is that if you can understand how to cook food, you're more likely to prescribe it. This was based out of a study in 2004 by Erica Frank, that the greatest predictor of a doctor or a healthcare provider recommending their patients a behavior is them themselves doing a behavior. And so what happened, the chefs of the health system that I used to work for said, we would like to learn how to cook more healthy so we can actually feed our patients in our hospitals. So this is me and 13 of the chefs affiliated with what was North Shore LIJ Health System, which now became Northwell Health, and with Chef La Marita, who is an ICE graduate as well, at the Natural Gourmet. And then what they ended up doing is bringing the recipes into the hospital and offer more plant-based options to their patients. Then I said, what if we grow our own food and serve our own food to our patients? So then I started looking at the history of gardens and hospitals. And in Europe, there's a long tradition of gardens and farms affiliated or in hospitals. And in fact, in World War II, 1943, this is actually here in New York City on the west side, kids tending the garden, which were called Victory Gardens. I just want to give you a sense of what happened there. So I think we are in a similar position here now lately, probably in the last 30 years. Our food system is sick, and so is our healthcare system. And so what President Truman did was to ration some of the actual industrial food sources to the military effort. The government offered its citizens seeds and opportunities and classes on how to develop their own gardens. And these, if you don't know, were called Victory Gardens. So then I had this premise, this is my mom's quote, actually, if you grow it, you eat it. And so in terms of the theme of this talk, this was a rooftop at Lenox Hill Hospital that I would pass by every single day for the last 8 years. Back when I was a resident at Lenox Hill Hospital, 2001 to 2003, we used to go out there, and it looked just like this. And people would smoke up there, sunbathe, and hang out. And when New York City introduced the smoking ban, what they did, the hospital did, is just simply padlock the door, and for 7 years, no one was ever able to go out into that garden. So I came back to Lenox Hill after spending my time at Harvard to this, what happened to the garden? And so this is what I was walking by, and for about 3 years, I was trying to knock on every single door. By the way, if you ever think about doing an urban rooftop garden, there's going to be 15 no's ahead of you, and I can help you with at least 10 of them in preparation, particularly in a hospital. So this was the garden, and using some of the, as I think Missy mentioned, honoring the existing space was something that I really wanted to kind of homage to this. So if you saw this is terracotta floors, and this is a roof, and it was on top of the auditorium. So there were some structural issues we had to consider, particularly it was never intended to be used as a garden or a farm, and so we had structural beams. So that which led us to using raised beds, which actually was a great idea because nowadays patients go out there and they don't have to bend down and actually pluck some of the things, so they can roll in on a wheelchair. For our elderly patients, they could just simply take from the actual raised beds. So this is a little process again, looked like that, then went to this, and this is where it is today. If you allow me, and I wish I would have done this hallway, actually students from the new school came and drew a mural on the hallway entering Victory Greens. It's Victory Greens, an homage to the Victory Gardens of World War II. We also have to take control of our foods. If we can't trust our government to do it, we should grow our own. And if you allow me 5 minutes, I will show you a little bit of what it looks like. So these are raised beds. My mom always taught me that if you can make a horrible piece of chicken taste good if you throw fresh herbs on it. So we actually focus on herbs and vegetables in our garden. And this is a typical afternoon. One of the biggest issues we had, not thinking about the popularity of it, is we did not consider having 5 garbage cans. And in fact, on a sunny day, it became more popular than the cafeteria. And so this was my wife's idea. If no one knows that healthcare workers are the second most stressed out and burnt out community behind active military and police. So this is our little homage. Victory Greens, we always say, treats both the mind, the body, and the spirit of our healthcare workers. Another picture. This is me on a Saturday before a Yankee game. We still did not get enough funding for an irrigation, so we actually still hand-watered. And this is some of the produce that we grow. Our kale, we grow it seasonally as well. Our chard here on the bottom right, fresh herbs, sage, and some peppers. And this is Julie on the summer sunflowers. And so the premise was kind of introducing some sort of community around food. And so that's what was the first idea. Then our hospital was supplied by Sodexo. As you know, most hospitals are supplied by large caterers, Sodexo, Aramark, et cetera. And for about a year and a half, I was trying to get the chefs to come up there and to snip some of this stuff so they can take it into the kitchen and serve both our patients and our staff. And in fact, about a year later, and that's another interesting story what I'd love to share if I had more time, the chefs started coming up every single morning, taking some of the fresh herbs and putting it onto their menus. Today, I'm told that 3 days out of the week, there is Rooftop basil blank, or Rooftop thyme and something. So as you can see, this is me and the chefs up on Victory Greens. And in fact, in 2015, over 20,000 people visited Victory Greens gardens. So then I leave you now with a meaningful question, as our speaker just asked us to do. So I want to leave this with you guys. So why can't hospitals and clinics provide healthy food and be places of wellness, healing, and care? Why can't they have the freshest and healthiest cafeterias and delicious patient food menus? And in fact, one of my dreams was actually to be Yelpable. Imagine that, right? Going to a hospital, serving healthy foods, and actually being on Yelp as a destination of choice. Lastly, why can't they have healing gardens and farms in addition to modern emergency rooms and operating rooms? Now, I just want to end with this here, is that, as you know, 40% of our food is wasted here in America. 75 to maybe 80% of hospital food is wasted. So I think we can actually do something about the cost of developing these sort of initiatives if we actually look at cost in a different way. Let's not waste it, just let's eat it. So with that, I'm Fresh Med, and I welcome all of you to come to our brand new center in downtown Brooklyn, where we actually do prescribe food as medicine. Thank you so much.
That was terrific. Thank you very much. And we have our next panelist is Bill Hilgendorf. And I read you his bio. Bill Hilgendorf grew up in Boston, as a trained industrial designer. He graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from the Rhode Island School of Design in 2002. During his time at RISD, he took off half of a year to study in Stockholm. While living in Sweden in the darkest and coldest times of the year, Bill fell in love with the Scandinavian aesthetic, and specifically their interiors and furniture design, which changed the course of his study. Upon returning to the States, Bill took an apprenticeship in Red Hook with furniture design builder and Danish furniture collector Vance Trimble. He returned to Providence for his last 2 semesters with a strong focus on furniture. Upon graduation, Bill moved back to Brooklyn and founded Uhuru with fellow RISD classmate Jason Horwath. The first piece he designed for Uhuru was the Stulen. This table stool was made of scrap wood from a custom job that was in production in their shop. This set the tone for Uhuru's first collection, launched in 2006, made almost entirely of offcuts and found materials. Over the years, Bill has found inspiration in storied materials where the design often references the location and history to create a narrative about the piece. With Bill and Jason at the helm, Uhuru has grown into a multidisciplinary design studio with a retail showroom in Tribeca and furniture production facilities in Brooklyn and Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Uhuru has a body of work that now lives in the Smithsonian Museum and Brooklyn Museum's permanent collection, as well as in hotels, restaurants, offices, retail stores, and private homes around the world. Welcome, Bill.
What I wanted to talk to you guys today about, I don't work with food every day. I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of our narrative process. Basically, I wanted to talk a little bit about our narrative design process. So I started Uhuru with my school friend Jason in 2004, and we started as a custom furniture company. We basically got some tools from a friend's dad who had them in storage, and subletted a space with some other friends from school, and started building basically whatever someone would pay us to do. And it started out mostly in sort of this high-end custom furniture range for residential clients. So we started working with a couple designers in New York, and through that time, we didn't have all of our resources went towards making those projects, and we didn't have a lot of extra sort of money to buy materials. We'd also just come out of school in a time when thinking about sort of green design was a new theme, and thinking about recycling and recycled materials. And so we were very inspired by the materials that you could find on the streets of New York. So the combination of that, as well as using offcuts from our custom jobs, we came up with our first collection. And so here it is. So this is the Stulen that we talked about, which was made entirely from offcuts from jobs that we worked on in the studio. And it basically allowed us to focus on trying to reduce all of our waste. With this piece, we're able to use, just in the process of milling wood, you have to square up the edges and plane it down, and you get these small pieces that are really unusable usually in production furniture. So what we did is we started to come up with designs and think about how can we utilize this material in a way that reduces our waste, and also focuses on a new theme that was emerging, which is upcycling. Taking something that was destined for the dumpster and turning it into a high value piece of furniture. So that our first collection really focused a lot on how do we reduce our waste, keep stuff out of the landfill, and also find materials that start to tell a story. So the below picture is our beam table, and that was two pieces of yellow hard pine that we found in a dumpster in Chelsea that came out of a construction site, a building that was being renovated. And that was those were our local materials. You can't get a lot of wood within the 5 boroughs, but these were the materials that were kind of being harvested either out of old buildings or with the Stulen, after we sort of exhausted our own supply of scraps, we set up a network with bins in other wood shops where woodworkers could put their extra scrap material into these bins that they couldn't use in their production, and then we would come and collect them to supply our need for material to make that product. So as that sort of evolved, we started thinking about more, not just the materials that we came across, but seeking out materials that had come to the end of their lifespan. And for our next collection we did, it was called the Coop Line, and it was made pretty much entirely from bourbon barrels. And I don't know how much you guys know about the production of bourbon, but when you make it, you have to use new white oak barrels, and they can't be used again. And although they're often used for 10 or 15 years, once they're done, they are usually broken down. And now many of them are shipped overseas to Scotland to finish Scotch in, but there's still always a number that don't make the cut and end up as planters or firewood. So my business partner Jason is from Kentucky and had some connections in the industry, and so we found a distillery that had a ton of barrels that they were getting rid of. And so we rented a truck and filled it up with about 30 barrels worth of staves and drove it back to Brooklyn. So from here, we really just started thinking and being inspired by the idea of the limitations of the material. You have a barrel stave, it's a compound curved piece of wood. It's charred on one side, and then it has like a sort of natural patina on the other side. So what are the possibilities of things you can do? And we just sort of dug into that and came up with a whole collection. The most sort of successful piece of that collection was our bilge chair, and that really used almost the stave in its entirety. The ends are cut off, but just using that curve, highlighting the charred interior, the natural char of the wood, and then creating a base, a cantilevered base that was made out entirely of leaf springs from old New York City fire trucks. We found a repair shop deep in Brooklyn that had the contract to repair all the suspension for the city fire trucks. And that's how that piece came to be. And it has a nice, because it utilizes the spring steel, it has a nice, and the cantilever base, it has a nice give to it when you sit down in it. So then after that, we really started to be sort of known as these guys who like to use weird materials. So one day, we got a phone call. Did you hear they're ripping up sections of the Coney Island boardwalk? Would you guys be interested in doing something of that material? And we thought, wow, that sounds really cool. So we went down, got a truckload of it, brought it back to our studio, and kind of had it sitting there for a while. And I got a phone call from a friend of my sister's who's working at New York Magazine, and she said, my editor's asking me, like, I need to come up with some ideas. She said, what are you guys working on? And I said, well, we're doing this hotel project and this restaurant, and then we got this material from the Coney Island boardwalk, but we haven't really figured out what we're going to do with it. And she said, really? Let me tell her. And she got back to me like right away and said, can we get the exclusive on that? And I said, sure, but we haven't designed anything yet. But that was the deadline, and then we came up with the Coney Island collection. So we went down to Coney Island for this collection. We went down to Coney Island. It was the middle of winter, and we did this photo essay. It was right after a snowstorm, so it was pretty bleak, but the iconic landmark structures of the Cyclone roller coaster, the Wonder Wheel, and the parachute jump really like popped out as these sort of forms that define the landscape. So in that, we based the designs of the pieces around those forms. So the idea was really to, for the pieces to be able to stand alone as objects, but also as you kind of learn more about it, start to study it, you unwrap these layers of, like the material and how it relates to the history of it, and sort of telling that story through the piece. I think what we sort of realized, with individual pieces of furniture, but also spaces, is the more you can tell a story of something and its history, the better chance that people are going to want to hold on to it, to pass it along, or in terms of an interior space, for it to endure, without being redone every couple of years. This is another piece, it's a console, but you can see this piece utilizes the offcuts of the last piece. So in the last piece, the stretchers that go across that create the seat of the lounge chair, we trimmed the edges. So this is the actual edge of each of these planks from the boardwalk, basically untouched. lightly sanded, and there's a coat of oil on it to seal it. But really just trying to highlight that sort of original surface. Some of this material was on the boardwalk for up to 50, 60 years. So you really see just sort of how it's weathered and the different things that happens to the material. And Ipe is an interesting material because it actually, Coney Island used to have crazy fires. I mean, all of New York had dealt with a lot of, the problem of things catching on fire. But when Ipe was first sent or exported from South America, they found out that it had the same fire rating as steel or concrete. So they could actually put it down and have this really warm boardwalk, but not have to deal with some of the issues of timber previously with it catching on fire. So as our sort of narrative process developed and evolved, we started thinking a lot more about this idea of not just telling a story of a material, but the impact of time on a material and capturing the surface of an object as it ages and builds a patina, and how it's affected by natural elements, both in its environment, but also the built environment around it. Not just nature, but the built environment. So this is the Fold collection, which we've been working on actually, and we're going to launch just in a couple weeks at the ICFF fair in Javits, was inspired by these objects that were just a run over in the street. So you can see kind of on the left there's a water bottle, and then there's these this metal strapping that goes around pallets to secure goods to them. And oftentimes this material gets cut off, close to the street on loading docks and stuff, and bits of it will get into the street and will just get run over and squished. So the idea of this collection was to take that form and some of those inspirations and to realize it in something that was more functional. So it's not just taking the direct material, but it's taking sort of the inspiration of that form and the patina that's created on it, and then designing a collection around that that represents sort of some of those ideas. And this is the bench. It's all made out of 1/4-inch brass, and what it has a really dark patina on one side, which is the natural oxidation of the material, and then on the other side, it's more of the natural brass color. So you see, as it folds over, you see the differentiation. Because when we work a lot with reclaimed or found materials, you'll get a situation where one side of the material gets exposed, whereas the other side is somehow protected. Like if you have a piece of wood siding on a building, and one side will get very, just weathered in a way. With wood, you have the harder spring wood, and then the softer summer wood. That's how you get the rings, obviously, in a tree and a cross section. And what happens is the warmer the summer wood, which is less dense, gets worn away, and then it creates these beautiful ridges as it gets worn away, as it meets up to the harder winter wood. So it's trying to capture sort of that idea that, with a lot of surfaces and their exposure to elements, that there are sort of different things that happen, and trying to capture that in a material. And then here's the rest of the collection. And then finally, I just want to sort of go through some of the restaurant spaces that we've worked on and designed. It's interesting because when I was in school, restaurants were never something that I set out to do, but it's sort of come to us and to me in ways that I hadn't expected. But it's been really exciting in terms of projects and a type of work to work on. I think what is so really interesting about restaurant spaces, especially in New York, is that very few of them, at least none of the good ones, were spaces that were designed to be restaurants. They're usually just general commercial spaces. They're converted industrial spaces. There's always sort of this element of adaptation and working within sort of some kind of limitations. It's not like this blank canvas where you can say, I want, like this, the kitchen to be here, and this is how the flow will work because we're going to build the building around the interior. It's more, the structure is there, and let's see how we can fit the functional space inside. So this is a Shake Shack that we designed. We've been doing furniture for them for a long time, and this is our first opportunity to design an entire restaurant, and it's in the Fulton Center in downtown Manhattan. And it's a Grimshaw designed building. It's I don't know how many people have been there, but it's a round 2-story building with this sort of oculus, giant oculus at the top. So it was a space that was curved. It was basically a third of a circle curved with the glazing also at an angle. So it was quite a challenge to figure out how to fit the furniture in and how to make it feel like a warm, inviting space. The idea of the design of this space was to think of the Fulton Center is a combination of about 10 subway lines, and so this idea of people traveling, passing through a space. So the idea was that to see, sort of as people come through the space and cross paths, the lighting fixture we designed sort of shows this movement through the space. And then in the back wall, we worked with a group out of the Netherlands that has an app that maps foot, bike, and automobile traffic throughout a metropolitan area and shows through lines of this traffic, creates maps of the space. So that was running on a projector in the back. This is a restaurant in Brooklyn that we worked on called Rucola. It's like very sort of, I feel like we did it about 7 or 8 years ago, and it's very classic kind of this Brooklyn style, I feel like, which is now everywhere. But a lot of reclaimed wood, very warm, cozy space. The lighting, the chandeliers that I made are all made out of old Italian canning jars and bicycle wheels. So it really uses that sort of, that reclaimed, like, sort of warm feel. This is a Sweet Green restaurant out in California. We did a lot of work with them. It's a lot of reclaimed oak, looking at thinking about materials. I think that in the same way with food and with furniture, like, people want to know where the materials are coming from. That's an interesting story to tell, and they want to know about the finishes, the materials. And then this is Hog Island Oyster Bar out in San Francisco. And this is kind of funny because this is all the way across the country, and they very specifically wanted for the seating, we did all the seating, the Coney Island boardwalk to be on the seating surface. So yeah, that's
I'm telling you, as I said, every one of these panelists could have mesmerized us for an hour and a half with all of their talents and creativity. And just kind of on a sidebar, just listening to them, I listened to how passionate they are about what they're doing and how, in many ways, they are living the dream that they want to have. And I know there's a lot of students here today. And, when I think about what I do, and to some degree, I repurpose people. And I take people who have been in a career that maybe they're not happy with, or maybe in a place where they're not happy. And what we do at ICE, and many of you I'm sure are aware of, is we bring you into this world of creative and passion and fun. And I think to some degree we all have much of the same businesses in repurposing. If you guys, we don't have that much time. If anybody wants to ask questions, please come down towards the microphones. I'm going to ask a few questions now of our panelists. When you listen to designers, of course, the design is the most important thing in a food business. When you listen to the chef, the food is the most important thing in the business. When you talk to people that are front of the house, it's the service that's the most important. And restaurants are 4 products: food, service, the design, ambiance, packaging, which is one, and some unique selling propositions, some sizzle. But at the end of the day, there's a cost attached to all of these things, and I know everyone has talked about it. And this is sort of a multi-tiered question I pose to our panelists. First of all, in doing all of the good things you do, and then I know some of you mentioned it, what is the cost benefit? How do you talk to the owners? How do you talk to your clients? How do you talk to them so that it transitions to the market about why should we do what you do? Why should we buy your food? Why should we do what you do with surfaces? Why should we have a garden on top? Why should we buy this furniture? What's the benefit to that, and how do we justify it in the cost?
Let's just jump in with one kind of a funny thing, which I think I've learned through my own practice, but also through others who do similar things of recycling, recycling pieces, which is you might be able to get materials themselves for much cheaper, say, than a new material. But the labor that goes into making that material usable and then repurposing is enormous. And so there's a cost that's kind of invisible initially, maybe to a client, to say, oh yeah, great, we're going to reuse this, we just got it. And then there's an enormous amount of labor. So, I'd like to think of that as kind of a social gesture. I mean, it sometimes it doesn't require much skill to do the labor to bring that material back, but it is an economy. And, in the best of cases, it's, kind of jolting a labor economy to help that thing move forward in its life, that recycled thing. So it's not that it costs less. In fact, the labor sometimes makes it cost more, but there's employment in the mix, which is kind of a benefit.
Yeah. I mean, that was something that we dealt with a lot at the beginning. People say, oh, the material, but it's found.
Can you all hear him?
It must be less expensive. And you're like, no. We had to take 100 nails out of that piece of wood to make it usable. And it is though. But what you're doing is like you said, it's all part of the whole economy. It's the whole package. You're adding jobs. You're adding value to that material. You're taking something that had less value or no value, and you're giving it a purpose. And then you're also giving it, hopefully, a story to tell about it. And it is not necessarily less expensive, but the idea is that you're adding value, and in the end, people will be able to appreciate that value that's added and understand. It also feeds into our dilemma as designers of making new things. If you can take something that's existing, even if just in part, and you can readapt it for something, you're also, in some ways reducing impact, which is, an important selling point, especially now.
Yeah, I love sitting next to two designers. I love sitting, on panels with doctors on my left and my right. I just learned so much more than I've learned in the last 3 years of any medical conference that I've attended that's based on sick care. So anyway, I'll get off my high horse here, but I think it's important to understand what we value, right? And, in hospitals, it's a business, and the cost of feeding people in our hospitals is a hard cost. And I think we have to look at what we're doing and what we're feeding to our patients as value, not so much as cost. And one of the things that we were able to do at Victory Greens is to make people start thinking about what are we doing? What are we feeding our patients in our hospitals? And I think Victory Greens allowed the opportunity for a hospital and a hospital healthcare system to think about, should we be in the business of sick care or healthcare, right? And it's called healthcare. And what we were able to do in terms of sustainability is it all started with a $25,000 grant. And that was 4 years ago, and it still remains there today because I think what that has done is offered the administrators a way to actually use PR, use marketing in their favor as a hospital that's thinking about offering healthy options into our hospital system. That's the first thing, right? So you're looking at costs as, it may be more expensive, but at the same time, you're adding so much value to your mission as a hospital. The other thing is that, as I mentioned in my talk, so much of our hospital food, well, who loves hospital food? Anyone in here been there and think it's...
I love it. It's amazing.
Right. So again, 70% is wasted, and what I wish I would have done, my next project, if I stayed, was to think about how we actually can measure the total waste after you actually make things taste better. right? So I would argue the fact that 75% of the waste that is currently happening in our hospitals would be deeply cut if you actually make food taste better and deliver it in a service way. And the whole experience of eating, particularly when you're sick, I think is so important.
I think people also today just expect that you're giving them the best quality that you can, and they're willing to pay for it. And so, you know, we buy from farms, we buy from big producers who work with farms. I have 40 pounds of ramps coming today from a forager who drives from West Virginia, and our guests want to know that we're doing that, and they're willing to pay for that. The ramps that I get from this guy are much, much less expensive, but like you talked about with the labor, it takes one person probably 5 hours to clean those ramps. So, but the quality is amazing, and you're supporting a single person who's going out and foraging. So to me, I think it's just an expectation now that that's what people want.
One of the interesting things is because everyone on the panel is trying to do special things and really creative things, the next step is how do you actually send that message to the customer? How does the customer know? In your case, it's easier because it's still a challenge because you have to maintain the staff who's sending the message that these ramps were very, very special. But how do you send the message that this was made from Coney Island reclamated? How do you send the message to a hospital patient that this was grown on the roof? Or you get Sodexo to buy in. How do you send the message that the foundations of this restaurant are absolutely gone with the most pristine types of finishes? How do you send that message? And how do you get, I know it's not you because you guys are selling, but how does the message rhetorically get to the customer?
I'm lucky, I have a staff who wants to know.
Yeah.
I mean, my staff asks me every day before service, well, where did the clams come from, and where did the cod come from? And sometimes I don't have an exact answer. I mean, I use a fish vendor who I know is buying responsibly, but one day my clams might come from Virginia, and if I don't happen to look on the invoice that day, I don't necessarily have the answer, but luckily my staff wants to know, and they're excited about it. So I think it starts with the top of just starting with your restaurant as this is what we do, and we're always going to have good product. My food happens to be extremely simple, and if you don't start with the best, you can't mask that in any way. So I think you have to have your staff buy into what you're doing, and in turn, they pass that message on. But I also think for the guest is demanding. The guest wants to know. They ask the questions.
The millennial of the day is, as everyone talks, everyone wants to know the story.
Yep.
And you guys have great stories to tell, all of you.
It's very interesting, actually, because in the previous panel, there was this discussion about, don't say healthy, just say delicious, or like, don't tell them what you're doing because we're just doing it. And I thought that was really interesting. And, I think the questioning from the customer, that everybody who's there, the people who are serving the food, who are, presenting the restaurant, if they're armed with knowledge, then they can answer questions. But then the other question about broadcasting what you do it's a very good question. I think we're in the business of healthier interiors, and it's a much newer concept than the organic movement, say, that has come along. I think that it's true that people want to ask these questions about food. I think that people don't ask so much about, is
Right.
an interior healthy or not?
Mm-hmm.
People assume that it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I find that actually a dilemma. Like,
is.
how do you,
It
because
is.
you don't want to be preachy either. You don't want to say, like, this is healthy and that one over there is not.
Exactly.
But, so I think it's a balance. I think answering questions, having people who could answer a question when it's asked and not answer it before it's asked is a really good
Mm-hmm.
method. I don't know what you guys think.
I find it fascinating. In my world, we call it patient satisfaction. And actually, CMS, the Center for Medicare Services, is actually now, upon discharge, you're actually getting a questionnaire about how was your experience. And so I have been asked to consult with, I don't know if you guys know this, in hospitals they have this thing called the Chief Experience Officer now, who actually is in charge of your experience during a hospital stay. And 90% of the complaints are two things: noise and food. And so now, when the actual profits of your reimbursements will decrease because your experience is less than suitable, based upon two things, which I think you can be very easily modifiable, right? You can totally modify the food. That is when now you're starting to see hospitals thinking about serving better food, better quality food. And I've, fortunate for myself is that I've been consulting with hospitals, and most recently we're just in Florida speaking with Compass Group, another large food vendor that is thinking about how to make more food deliveries, both in our cafeterias, in our hospitals, and in our schools, more sustainable, healthy, delicious, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think along the same lines, I think the customer is now having a voice in the experience of a hospital, which is changing the culture of what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, to go back, I think it starts with your staff and like them being excited about, your mission and what you want to bring forward as a product. And then also, but you do have an audience that is much more interested in where things come from and more holistic experiences. I think, 15 years ago, people didn't think about where, material came from as much, and now they really want to know. It's more on the forefront. People are more, they're just more exposed, I think, to information in a way that they weren't about materials before.
Terrific. Sorry, do you have a question? Oh.
Ladies first.
Please.
Hi. So my question is tangential to this question you posed about cost of using repurposed materials, but rather from not from the client's perspective, but from the consumer perspective. So is it possible to create restaurants with the intent of feeding the masses and using repurposed materials, but still keeping the food costs relatively low? Because a lot of places that do use repurposed materials are expensive to eat at, and people can't afford that.
So when you're talking about repurposed materials, you mean like the restaurant itself?
The space itself, yeah.
I mean, I think it is possible. In our case, we made some of the furniture, but mostly we chose what we were calling vintage furniture, musty and, I don't know, rotten or something. What did you say? Moldy. But, if you have the right hunters and gatherers, I think you can buy a lot of things for less money and that are perfectly fine. So it's more about reusing. We could call it upcycling if you change something. But I think that there's some real potential in that is, reusing things that are out there rather than kind of redesigning the thing before you put it back out there. So, and spaces too. I mean, the story of the auto body shop it's kind of amazing, right? I mean, I think it also works on the level of intrigue. People want to see what it's like to eat in a place that was once, a mechanic shop. I mean, so, what you decide to keep from that past life and change could be even pulled back even more. I mean, we could, I could go on about that for a long time. I think that there's temporary experiences that we can create that are less about total redesign and more about reuse in creative ways.
Also, just remember, in developing a business, the cost of the business does not always 100% influence what the cost of the product is, because you can have a very expensive place that does a very expensive fit out of a place that could be very cheap because you have a lot of customers, so the cost of the menu, because investment cost does not necessarily translate into cost of an expensive food or beverage. Any other comments?
Yeah, I mean, just to that, I think that, in the case of your restaurant, like, it probably would have been a lot cheaper to just throw up drywall, over all the walls than to go and repoint the brick and do that.
Is that what it's called, repointing?
Repointing, yeah.
Thank you.
And sealing it and stuff. But, in some ways, it's just time. A lot of this, working with found materials or even curating chairs or silverware, it's just, it's taking the time to go out and find it, and, of course, time is money, but, you can do that in a way, that doesn't add a lot of cost. You can add time, add value to something just by spending time thinking about it and working and putting together a collection. It doesn't necessarily raise the cost.
So, do you have a question?
Sure, yeah. Thank you very much. I just wanted to first say it's been a pleasure to be here for 2 days. Absolute amazing conversation. And wanted to recognize and thank the folks from the New School and ICE who are in the audience. Maybe if you can just kind of stand and just kind of wave your hand, give a little, what do we have here? I mean, you guys did really a great job with this. Thank you very much. Awesome, awesome. Thank you. The thread that I'm hearing for the past 2 days, I'm a supply chain student now currently for my MBA, and I work for Compass Group, a sector of Compass Group, Chartwell's higher ed, not the K through 12, but my focus, my thread, what I'm hearing is supply chain. There's issues, ramps coming from Virginia, expiring short-dated milk, extra tomatoes. You know, can we potentially leverage our student brain power to freeze short-dated milk, package things in product shipped from the west to the east, perhaps saving time picking up, which you probably have a great story, getting the barrels in Kentucky, but what can we do to interconnect some of these disciplines that I'm hearing, which we're all connected? You know, I would never think that I'm connected to an oak barrel, but I drink bourbon, right? So that chair, I mean, it's been a great discussion. I just want to, I guess, pose that in terms of logistics and infrastructure. You know, we don't have a train system necessarily for logistics from one coast to the other with, you know, hubs and maybe we do, you know, hubs for these types of recycling and upcycling and output to input. I really would just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Go ahead.
Well, I think, like, you know, with food or materials, like anything that you can find locally is going to add, like.
Yep. Mike, please, yeah.
Anything that you can. Sorry. Oh, sure. Anything that you can find and utilize that's local is going to expand. What's going to reduce costs, and it's going to expand the lifespan. Or the shelf life of it. So, I mean, I think, that's something that we, as designers, are always like trying to utilize what's local, what's available to us now. And I think, I'm sure, within the food supply chain, it's the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, also ramps kind of start south and move north, and I happen to find a forager who I really liked, who I want to support, and West Virginia is not that far away. But we do try and use local when we can. Living in the Northeast, I mean, anyone who's telling you that they're only using local stuff in the middle of February, it's not possible. But like my focus in the summer totally changes. In about a month, we'll start getting 70% of our produce from one farmer in Long Island. Who grows stuff specifically for me. So I think it's kind of a little give and take, and you have to be able to compromise a little, because we don't live in California, but I think you have to try your best when you can. So there are 6 months of the year where I'm really fortunate to have farmers very, very local, and there are 6 months of the year that it's a little more challenging, and we always do our best to kind of navigate through that.
Right, so are there any specific logistic companies though, or third-party logistic companies or infrastructure plans that you've heard that you think might be in the works?
I actually, there is, we can talk offline, but there's someone I know in Kentucky, which I learned is like the hub of, I think, FedEx, right? There's a big, huge food hub that's happening in Kentucky because all the planes are coming there for FedEx, and now they're just, the foods are chasing that. So
yeah, that's great.
I know there's actually 2 of them through like these kind of food hubs that they're trying to do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And one more question.
Hi, first I have a comment to make, but then I'll lead up with a question. So Steve, you did mention that, you asked, what's the business standpoint behind like using reclaimed materials. So I work as a consultant for Sawkill Lumber. We're a reclaimed lumber company. Uharu has worked with us. They're one of our star clients because they already use reclaimed materials, but how do you get other people on board that are more price conscious, who are more looking for more, I guess, conventional materials? And, initially we were focusing on the character and the sustainability aspects, but I started thinking about, well, our wood's more strong and durable because comes a lot of it from old growth forests. So it's denser and it will last longer. Secondly, it's a lot more like stable because it has been air drying for decades, if not centuries. So you don't have the problems of shrinkage for flooring, which could lead to like abnormal gaps and stuff. So those kind of things, thinking creatively, also saying that we're local, so we're flexible, we can change orders on the dime for our local clients. And we're flexible and we're versatile. We have over 100 varieties of wood. Those kinds of trying to just like, leave the whole, green. As much as I believe in that, I think that a lot of people need more behind. I mean, we're going to get that niche market, but we're not going to be able to grab the mainstream market by just pushing those initiatives. And so now I just have a question. I used to own a thrift shop, and so I know all the best thrift stores in New York City. If you guys need any recommendations, but I'm curious to know where you guys find your reclaimed materials and furniture in New York and Connecticut. I'm from Connecticut, so that would be helpful for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think you bring up a really great point, and it's something that Missy said also, like, it is about relationships a lot. Mm-hmm. The forager that's finding the ramp, you really like that person, you trust their curation of the best ramps, perhaps. Mm-hmm. It's the same in the world of things. There's certain people that you form relationships with, and you trust their eye, you trust what they see, and then you trust that you could say, I'm looking for these 4 things, could you keep an eye out for me? You're going to watch the cost, you're going to watch for this character. So I think it is a lot about relationships with people, and less so maybe about sometimes about an independently owned store or place, but I think it is a lot about the relationship of that forager, and sometimes that means you sacrifice some big corporate logistics company for that particular forager and their idiosyncrasies of their trucking methods, and you build those relationships into the business. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, I think also I agree with you about the branding piece, the marketing piece, that you can no longer say, well, this is great because it's sustainable. It's
Absolutely.
Not, that's not a selling point as much as durability or cost.
Oh, I'm told we have to wrap up, unfortunately. But I want to thank our panelists, and I realize sitting here that I am the oldest one on this panel, so I'm sort of vintage. I'm going to repurpose myself, and I'm going to come, next time you see me, I will look like this. And just remember the passion these guys and gals have. Wow. Don't you lose that passion. Wow. Thank you.